Okay, now let's go ahead and create an RDS instance. But for that, we first need to create a virtual private cloud or VPC. Now let me just add the details here. So I will say create VPC. And now let's see what code suggestion it provides. So it's giving me the VPC is new CDK AWS EC2.vpc. So we know that for creating the VPC, we need to import EC2 module. So this seems correct. So now let me just click on the tab key to accept this suggestion. Now I also need to import the EC2 module. So let me do that. So let me say import. And you can see it's giving me that suggestion, import star as EC2 from AWS CDK lib. So that's pretty cool. Let me just accept that using the tab key. So if I go to documentation, you can see the same. Let me just do a quick search, AWS CDK VPC. So you can see here in the documentation, we have to import the VPC construct. And for that, we need AWS EC2. And that's a suggestion that Code Whisperer provided me to import the EC2 construct. Okay, now let's go ahead here, and it had already provided me this suggestion to create a variable VPC. Now let's add some properties to this. So the first suggestion it's providing me is use the NAT gateway 0, which is good. I don't want to incur any cost, so I'll accept that using the tab button from the keyboard. Now let's look at the next suggestion. So it's saying max AZ, 2 AZs. Say if I want to change that, I just press the right arrow button on my keyboard and it will make some changes, or it will give me different suggestions. I'll just ignore this subnet configuration and press an escape. Let me just try some other things. We could look at some other attributes. Say you can see here, we have the VPC name, maybe try an VPC name. And let's see. So I'll say VPC name. And then it's going to give me some suggestions. So it's saying I can use code whisper -VPC. So I'm going to accept that using the tab button again from my keyboard. So now let's look at next suggestion. So it's saying CIDR block as /16. So maybe I'll press the right arrow button on my keyboard and see if there are any other suggestions. Okay, so it's not giving me any other suggestions. So I'll just accept that. And maybe the last one will take a look. It's saying subnet configuration. I will just ignore that, press the escape button on my keyboard. Now say I need different suggestion, but it's not providing me right now. So I will press Alt C on the Windows. And you can see again, it's giving me subnet configuration, and I'll just press escape. If you are on Mac, then you have to press Option C for more suggestions. If you are on Windows, you just press Alt C. And as I said, keyboard shortcut, if you want to accept the suggestion, you have to press tab, navigate between the suggestions, left and right arrow. And if you want to just ignore, then you press escape. So this looks pretty good. Now let me just close the brackets and then we should be good. Okay, now the last thing we're going to do is we're going to create an RDS instance. So I will say create an RDS instance. So it gets a prompt on what I'm trying to do. Okay, so it's already giving me some suggestions that you can create a variable RDS, and this is, I'm just giving some more details. So probably I will just accept that. And I will just go and import the RDS here. So if I go to the documentation, let's take a look and it will give us an idea, the suggestion that Code Whisperer is providing is correct or not. So I'll say AWS CDK RDS. Okay, so the first thing we have to import is the AWS RDS module. So let's go back and I will say import. And you can see here, it's already based on the comment I had provided here to create an RDS instance and the code suggestion that it had made here. It's guessed that this is what I'm looking at. So I will accept this and press the tab button. Okay, great. So this is really great. It's really helping me. And now let's look at some of the attributes. So I will look at the database instance here on the left. And now let's look at the attributes. So only mandatory one is the engine and the VPC. The rest of them are all optional. Those are the two maybe I will use, and I will use a database name. So now let's go ahead and do that. So you have to use the engine and VPC. Let's take a look at the engine, what it describes. Okay, so it's describing the kind of database engine you want to use, whether you want to use a MariaDB, Oracle, SQL Server. So it's created the RDS, then it is using the logical ID as RDS, and then it is giving the option of using MySQL. So it's already covered this part, which is a database engine. The next thing that's mandatory is VPC. So it's giving an error. I'm not really sure. Let me just try this again. I will just remove this and let's see why it's giving an error. Okay, so the first thing we are going to do is use the engine. So let's say engine, and okay, now it's giving me the suggestion to use rds.database instance engine.mysql. So this is what we had imported, the RDS from here, and okay, that's the suggestion it was giving me, and it's using RDS and then database instance engine, and this seems correct. So I'll press tab and accept that. Now the next key one is the VPC. So you can see again, it realizes the ones that are mandatory. VPC is a mandatory one, so it's giving me that suggestion. Okay, so I'll accept that. Okay, I'll just change the name maybe. Let's call it demo, and I think it should be good. Okay, now let's go ahead and provide database name, and it's already giving me a suggestion to name it as Code Whisper. So tab. Okay, I think these properties are enough for now, just for the demonstration purpose. So I will just close the brackets, and I just need one more bracket here. Okay, so this seems good. We have pretty much everything we need. So let me just go ahead and do a CDK deploy and see if this works. So I'll just pause the video for a little bit till this is complete. Okay, now you can see that the update is complete, but when I go to the CloudFormation stack, I don't see any of these resources. And I deliberately did this because I wanted to show you, because I spent a lot of time in trying to figure out what's the reason. And the reason is that it's not saving automatically after I install the Code Whisperer. I don't know if it's just with me or it's an issue in general. So if I now just do a save here and now do a CDK deploy, it's going to work. So I'll just pause the video for a little bit. Okay, I think it's giving me an error, and the error you can see here, it's saying that AWS CDK VPC CIDR is depreciated. And that's true. If you go to the documentation, it will show that this attribute, the CIDR one, is depreciated and we should not use it. But the thing is that it actually prompted me. So that's not a correct one, though it's depreciated, it shouldn't have. So if I just remove this, and I think it should work now. So let me just do a clear, do a CDK deploy. So I'll just pause the video for a little bit. Okay, it's giving me an error again saying that there are no private subnets in this VPC. Ideally there should be, but I'm not really sure. So let's do that. Let's add a subnet configuration, and it's giving me that suggestion. So let me press Alt C and see what it says. Okay. So again, I'll press Alt C. So it's not really giving me anything useful. So if I just go back to documentation and let me go to the VPC, and you can see this is how the subnet configuration is actually implemented. So I will just copy this here, subnet configuration. So I am actually on the VPC page, so you can see here. Now let me go back to my code editor and just paste it here. Okay, so you just need to get rid of this subnet configuration. Okay, so now this is good. You can see now we are creating 3 different subnets, one public, private with egress, and private isolated. Okay, so I'll get rid of this as well. Now we have to launch this RDS instance in the private isolated. So if I go back to the documentation and for database, so now I'm on the documentation for database instance. So if I look at the properties and search for VPC subnets, so here we have the VPC subnet. And if I just click on the selection, so this is how we can select the VPC subnet. Okay, so I will just copy this, or maybe I will just type it out and see what suggestions the Code Whisperer provides us. So I say subnet, and let me do Alt C and see if Code Whisperer provides any suggestions. So Okay, so yeah, so good. So it's providing me some suggestion on what is the subnet type I should use and which is the private isolated. So I'll press the tab button on my keyboard to accept this. So this looks good now. Hopefully it will work. Okay, it's giving me some syntax error. I think I need a bracket here. Okay, now it's gone. So hopefully everything will work. I will do a save here and let me do a clear and then do a CDK deploy. So I'll just pause the video for a little bit till this stack creation is complete. So it's asking me there are going to be some security changes. So I'll say yes. Okay, it's taken a long time to create all these resources. You can see 27 out of 31 have been created. So I just waited more than a few minutes. Let me take a look at the CloudFormation. And you can see here we have the CloudFormation stack. And if I just go to resources, let's go to flat view. So we have the bucket that we had created earlier. Then we have bucket policy. So I don't know, it's creating a RDS instance, an IAM role, EC2 security group, VPC. Okay, I think our VPC is already created. Let me just take a look. Okay, great. So we have the Code Whisperer VPC, and I think that's the name that Code Whisperer had suggested, Code Whisperer dash VPC. Okay, so this is good. Then let me take a look at the RDS instance. So I think RDS instance is still being created. You can see create in progress. I'll just go here. So you can see the Code Whisperer stack RDS has been created and it's available now. Size MB5 large, and it's a engine MySQL. I think that's what we had provided. Okay, finally after 540 seconds, I think it's completed. That's almost 9 minutes it took to create the entire stack. Okay, if I just go back to CloudFormation and you can see the update is complete. And if I just do a refresh, we should have our final RDS stack. Okay, let me just search for the RDS instance. So it's created a lot of services. Yeah, you can see it here. So RDS instance, if I just go, hopefully it should be complete by now. So you can see now it's available here. And if I just click on this, and the status is available and the class, so we have M5 large, and we had MS SQL community as the engine. So yeah, everything looks good. So this is how you can use a Code Whisperer for automated code generation to improve the productivity of a developer. So overall, I think it really helped. There were a few misses in terms of suggesting the CIDR block, which has been depreciated, and not highlighting the subnet types. But overall, I think it's really improved the productivity. So if you're following along, don't forget to do a CDK destroy, because the RDS instance that it creates by default is M5 large. So you could incur some charges. So don't forget to destroy the stack and delete the RDS instance. In some scenarios, it might give you an error saying that the log group for the RDS instance does not exist, and which is okay because you'll be able to create the S3 bucket, the VPC, and the RDS instance. So you can either add the log group or you can just ignore that error. The whole point of this section is to show you how to use Code Whisperer to improve the productivity and not really demonstrate an end-to-end use case. Hope this is useful. Thank you. There are three types of constructs in AWS CDK: level 1, sometimes called as L1, level 2, and level 3. Now let's try and understand what these L1, L2, and L3 constructs are, and then just do a quick hands-on on all three of them. First, we have the L1 construct. So L1 construct is a low-level construct, sometimes called as CFN or CloudFormation resources. How you can identify an L1 construct is through this prefix CFN. So any AWS resource that you create using CDK L1 construct, it will have a prefix CFN and then the name of the resource that you're trying to create. So what really is an L1 construct? It basically maps one-to-one with the CloudFormation resource that you are trying to create. Say you are trying to create an S3 bucket, and if you look at the construct that we have for S3 bucket, it will be CFN bucket. and all the attributes that you can see for CFN bucket, you will see the same attributes that you will see for AWS S3 bucket, which is a way to create an S3 bucket in the CloudFormation. Now here I have opened the CFN bucket, the level 1 construct through which you can create an S3 bucket in CDK, and you can just see the attributes here. So you have accelerate configuration, access control, and in this tab I have the CloudFormation documentation on how to create an S3 bucket. And if you look at its attributes, so you have the same accelerate configuration, access control, analytics configuration. Now it is recommended not to use L1 construct if an L2 construct is available. Now the question is, why do we have the L1 construct if it is not to be used? The reason is AWS CDK is an evolving framework. So a lot of the resource and their attributes might not be available in L2 or L3 construct. So that's why AWS provides you with L1 construct as well, where L2 and L3 constructs are not available. You can use the L1 construct. Now what is an L2 construct? L2 construct is a higher level construct which comes with a lot of intelligent defaults. So what it means is that you don't need to define like CloudFormation or L1 construct each and every property of the resource that you're creating. So it will by itself create a lot of intelligent defaults as it is, and the construct that you have, like if you take the same example as S3 bucket, and you can see it here, so you don't see the CFN prefix in this construct. Now just to compare the L1 and L2 construct, say if you are creating a VPC, then in CloudFormation or L1 construct, you will have to create the VPC subnets, route table association with the subnets, internet gateway, and whole bunch of other things. Typically, you will have to write 282 lines of code to create VPC and all its components. And if you do the same using the L2 construct, then all you have to do is write just 3 lines of code, and AWS CDK L2 construct will by default create rest of the resources like public subnets, private subnets, route table association, internet gateway, etc. So that's why it's recommended to use L2 constructs. Now we have the L3 constructs. They are even higher level construct or sometimes called as a pattern. So they are very focused on specific use cases. So what most organizations do is once they are doing large scale migration, they will define a certain set of predefined architecture pattern that they will use for migration or creation of new applications. And some of the common ones is like if you're using a microservice architecture pattern, then you're going to create an API gateway, Lambda, and S3 DynamoDB or RDS. So what L3 construct does is you can create a corresponding construct to the architecture pattern you have. So with just few lines of code, you can actually create all the resources using the L3 construct in a standard fashion. So AWS provides you with many L3 constructs. So one of them is AWS API Gateway Lambda REST API. So if you use this construct with few lines of code, you can create the API Gateway Lambda REST API, IAM roles, and other services. Similarly, you have a pattern for application load balancer, Fargate service. Now let's go ahead and do a hands-on. So we'll create an S3 bucket using the L1 construct with bucket name and versioning attributes. Then we have already earlier created the L2 construct with bucket name and versioning. And then we're also going to create an L3 construct using AWS API Gateway Lambda REST API L3 construct. In one of the previous lectures, we created the S3 bucket. So we might not have realized, but we created this S3 bucket using the L2 construct. So I have opened the same code because I don't want to repeat the same thing and waste your time. And what we're going to do is in L1 construct, we're going to create a bucket with attributes, bucket name and versioning. Same for L2 constructs, and then for L3 constructs, then we're going to use this construct AWS API Gateway Lambda REST API. So now let me just modify the code here and let me just say S3 bucket using L1 construct. Okay. So we already have the documentation open. We discussed that we are going to use CFN bucket for L1 construct. So here is the CFN bucket. So the thing we have to do is first we have to import this. So that we have already done. You can see here we have already imported S3 as AWS S3. Now, okay, I'm going to say const and let's say S3 demo bucket, and we can say L1 because it's L1 construct, and then we say new, and then what we have imported from here is S3. So we'll say S3. And now our construct name. So if I just go back to the documentation, you can see here. So we have the CFN bucket. So I'll say CFN bucket and then put a bracket. Then we put the scope, which is always this, comma. Then we provide the logical ID and let's call it as L1 S3 bucket. Okay, let me make it caps lock. So as we discussed, we're going to provide two attributes. One is the bucket name and the second one is versioning. So if I just scroll down, so the first thing is bucket name. So you can see here bucket name, it's a string, and let me just go and add that. So I'll say bucket name, and here is the prompt I get. Let me call it as L1 S3 bucket. Let me just put 111 so that just to make it unique. Remember that it has to be all in lowercase. The second thing we are going to provide is whether versioning is enabled or not. So if I go here, so versioning might be at end. So here you see versioning configuration. So that's what I'm going to put here. So versioning configuration. And you can see we have the versioning configuration here. And if I just open this in a new tab, you can see for the versioning, it has one property, which is status. And as I said, for L1, it's a one-to-one mapping to the CloudFormation. So if I go to this link that's provided here, and this is the AWS CloudFormation documentation, and you can see for status, you have two attributes. One is enabled or suspended, and it's a string. So I can go back and here you can see as well status string, and that's the interface for versioning configuration, right? So let me just go back and just say status, and it gives me that property, and I'm going to make it a string and say enabled. Okay, now we have the S3 bucket that we are provisioning using the L1 construct, and as I said, how do we recognize that is through this prefix CFN. Okay, and now for the S3 bucket that we created in one of the earlier lectures was done using the L2 construct. So let me just write that here. So if you go back to the documentation, you will see that we are using this L2 construct bucket. And if I look at the attributes, and so we have the bucket name, which is a string, and then we have the version, whether the bucket should have versioning or not. Okay, which is a little different from versioning configuration that's there in the L1 construct. So let me just change this bucket name. So let's say maybe we'll just copy this and just replace this by L2 S3 bucket, and we're just going to write a whole bunch of twos so that it's easy to recognize and it's unique. Versioning is true. So okay, and public read access, I'm going to just remove this attribute. Okay, it's giving me some error here, probably syntax error, so I think I just forgot the comma here. I think everything else looks good. So what we can do is we can just deploy and see if it works okay. I'm going to change this as well, maybe make it very similar. And let's call it as L2 S3 bucket. So I think everything else looks good. Let me just try and deploy and see what happens. So I'll just do cd info and CDK deploy. So I'm going to pause the video for a little bit till the stack is deployed. Okay, now this stack, infra stack has been created. So if I just go to the CloudFormation, so this is the stack. And if I go to resources, you can see we have the L1 S3 bucket. So I'm just going to open this. And this is the L2 S3 bucket. So this is the L1 S3 bucket. And if I go to properties, you will see that versioning has been enabled, that we had enabled for bucket being created using the L1 construct. And then similarly, this is the bucket we created through level 2 construct. If I go to properties, you can see here again, bucket versioning has been enabled. Okay, hope now it's clear how to create L1 and L2 constructs using AWS CDK. Thank you. Now I'm going to show you how to create an L3 construct. And for that, we are going to use this pattern AWS API Gateway Lambda REST API. So using this construct, we can create all these services REST API resource method stage AMROS invocation role Lambda proxy integration by using this construct. So let me just go to the documentation. So you can see here we have the Lambda REST API construct and we have to import the AWS API gateway for this construct to work. And now let's just take a look at the props. So if you look at the props, what you need is a handler. So this is the default Lambda function that handles all the requests from this API. So what you need to do is you need to create a Lambda function so that once the REST API is invoked, AWS API gateway is going to route that request to this particular Lambda function. Now remember the limitation of this construct is that it's going to be a AWS Lambda proxy integration. That means you cannot do any request or response transformation. Now what I've done is I've already imported the AWS Lambda function that we created in one of the earliest lectures because I don't want to repeat the same thing again. So I'm going to just remove a few lines, the CloudWatch that we had created. So we don't need a CloudWatch. And we're going to just remove this CloudWatch alarm thing from here. Okay. Now we just have the Lambda function and then we have the services folder where we have this simple Lambda function which says hello from Lambda. Let's call it as hello from AWS CDK course Rahul. Okay. So now if I just go back, now if I go to the documentation, so the first thing we have to do is import this AWS API gateway. So let's do that and I'll just copy this same thing and let's change this to AWS API. I think AWS is already there, so I'll say API gateway and it will just show me here. Let me call this as API GW. So hopefully you already know how to create a Lambda function as we had discussed earlier. Now let me just go down and say, let's see what's the name of the module. So we'll say Lambda REST L3 construct. Let's call it as L3 construct. Okay, so we'll say const L3, let's call it L3 API and we'll say new. Then what we had imported here was API GW. So we'll say API GW and we'll say dot. So we should have this REST API somewhere. So let's call it as REST. So you can see here REST API construct we have. So we'll say scope, which is this, comma, then let's call it the logical ID. Let's call it as L3 construct. And then we'll just put the attributes or properties. Okay, I think I just put a comma here. So if I just go down, now if I just go to the documentation, so let's look at the attributes. So we have the first is handler, which is the Lambda function. So I will say handler. Okay, I think it's just giving me a syntax error. I think I just forgot to close the brackets here. Let's do that. Okay, now that error is gone, so let's just say handler. Okay, again it's giving me an error. Let me just take a look on what's the construct name. Okay, the construct name is Lambda REST API, and I think I just wrote a REST API here, so that's not the right one. So let me say Lambda REST API. Okay, I think this is the correct one. So if I just now rewrite this, hopefully, yeah, okay. Now it's giving me the correct property. So the handler, as we saw, is the Lambda function. So we'll just say demo Lambda, what we have here. So I think that's the only mandatory property, but let's see if we can add something else, maybe a name that just helps us identify it. So here we have the REST API name is a string and the name of the API gateway, a REST API resource. Okay, so that is the name of the resource. So we'll say REST API name. So let's call it as demo L3. Okay, so I think that should be pretty much it. Yeah, I think I can get rid of this. Okay, so we have the Lambda function and then we have the Lambda REST API L3 construct. Okay, before I deploy, so you can see there are a lot of other properties that you can define. So how to deploy, then what are the various stages, API key, source key if you require, deployment option, description, domain name, etc. And if you don't provide, then AWS will provide some defaults, and you can read through a little more. So if you don't provide API key source, the default will be metering is disabled. Similarly, if you look, you can look at the rest of them: clone form, CloudWatch role. If you don't provide any role, then this is the role that will be provided. So default integration, so inherited from parent. So you can see what are the defaults, and for now we're just going to use defaults. So let me just do a CDK deploy. So let me do CD info and then CDK deploy. So I'm just going to pause this video till the deployment is complete. So it's giving me some service role that it's going to create. So I'll say yes. Now you can see that deployment is complete after 67 seconds. Okay, now you can also see it provides an output, which is the invoke URL for the REST API that's been created. So if I just copy this and run it, and you can see it gives us the message, hello from AWS Lambda course with Rahul. And that's what we had in our Lambda function. So if I go to the Lambda function, so this is the message you can see, the response that we get, hello from AWS CDK course with Rahul. Now, if I go to the CloudFormation template and see what are all the services that have been created. So let me just go to the CloudFormation. Okay. Okay. I don't see the stack here. Let me just check what is the region that we had provided. So if I go to this bin folder, and you can see here, we had the region as US East 2. So let me just go to the US East 2. You can see that we have the stack here. So if I just click on this, and you can see all the resources that have been created. So if I just go to flat view, you can see we have the AWS Lambda function. Then as an intelligent default, it's also created an IAM role. It's created an API gateway, REST API gateway. Let's create the method, permissions, deployment, stage. So it's deploying to prod. You can also see some other resources like methods, Lambda permissions, and whole bunch of other things that's been created. So if I just go to this REST API, so you can see this is a REST API. It is the demo L3 that we had provided. So if I go to stages, so you can see the prod stage has been created as an intelligent default. So I just click on this. So this is my invoke URL. So if I just open it again, you can see this is the message that we had in our Lambda function. So this is how you can create an L3 construct, as you can see here, with just, I think, about 10 lines of code, 5 for Lambda function and 3 lines that we've used for creating the REST API, IAM roles, stages, methods, and some other resources that we just saw. So this is how you can create an L1, L2, and L3 construct. Hope this is useful. Thank you. Okay, in this lecture, we are going to launch AWS CDK apps using CI/CD pipeline. So we're going to create a simple Lambda function, and then we're going to launch that using the CI/CD pipeline. So I've created a step-by-step guide on how to create the pipeline, and then how to create the Lambda function and launch it through the pipeline. In this video, we're going to learn first how to create the CI/CD pipeline, and then how to launch any AWS CDK app. The first thing you have to do is you have to bootstrap your AWS environment, and this is the command for that. So what I've done is I've already taken my account number. You can see here in the red, this is my AWS account number, and this is my region. So let me go to AWS console. So you have to replace the account number with whatever your account number is here. The region, you can select US East 1. Okay, now let's go ahead and open the Visual Studio Code Editor. So I've just created a CI/CD folder on my local, and I'm going to open that using the Visual Studio. So this is my folder that I've created on the local. Just click on this, and then I'm going to open the terminal. Okay, you can see now this AWS CDK code pipeline is blank. So if I do an ls, there's nothing there. So let me do it clear. Now let's run our first command. So what I've done is, as I said, replace the account number here with my account number and region with US East. So I'll just copy this, and I'll just run it. It will bootstrap our environment. Okay, I think it's completed the bootstrapping process because I already had it bootstrapped. But for you, it might take a few minutes. So let's take a look at the next step. In the next step, we're going to initialize a project. I'm going to use GitHub. So you will need some kind of a code repository. And if you don't have a code repository, then you can just go to github.com and make an account. It's free. So I already have an account. So let me just go here. You can see this is the account I have, Rahul1981. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new repository. So it's a new repository. And then the repository name I have to give. So let's say demo CICD. And let me just give today's date. So it's 02/12/23. Okay, and it is going to be public. And let me say create repository. Okay, now it's created the repository. So I have to copy this link from here. That's shown here. I just copy that. And then what I'll do is I will change this where there is a red GitHub clone URL. I'll put my URL. So I will just paste it here. And then I would just have to provide a folder name. You can name it whatever you want. So I'll just name it as demo AWS pipeline. And then I will just copy this link and I will run this command. Let me do a clear first. And I will just run it. Okay. So it says it's an cloned and empty repository. Yeah, it's an empty repository right now. So that's fine. The next is we have to change directory to this demo AWS pipeline. And then the usual, we're going to initialize the project using CDK init app -- language types. Okay, let me say cd and then demo AWS pipeline. This is a folder or the directory that we just created. Okay, now I'm going to initialize the app. So I'm going to say CDK init app -- language and TypeScript. So it's going to initialize the app, so it's going to take a few minutes. I'll just pause the video for a little bit. I waited a few minutes. Now it's executed the npm install. You can see all done. So next step we have to do is we have to go to GitHub and get a personal token and then store that in the AWS Secret Manager with name GitHub token. So what happens is when you are pushing the code to the GitHub and it is trying to do the build with AWS code pipeline service, it will authenticate to GitHub using this personal access token. And you have to store this then in the secrets manager, and the name of the secret has to be this GitHub token. If you use something else, it's not going to work. And then you provide the token as the value of that GitHub token secret that you have created. So let's do that. So I'm on my repo that I just created. So I'll just go click here, click on settings, and I will just scroll down and say developer settings. And I will click on this personal access token. And there's a new one that they will introduce. It's still in the beta version, so I'll go for classic. And I will say generate new token, classic. Then you can just put a note on what the token is for, and then you can set the expiration date. So then you can define the scope that you want, and you can just click on the repo and then generate the token here. So I've already generated the token, but you can generate and just copy that token. Okay, it will take you to this page, and you can just put a token here, say demo, and then just click on this repo and then generate the token. So it will generate a token for you. So this is the token it will generate, and you can just copy this token. And then what you have to do is you have to go to AWS service and search for secrets manager. Okay, open the secrets manager. So it will take you to this page, and what you have to do is I already have created a secret because I was just trying out creating this pipeline. So you just click on the store a new secret, and then you can just select other type of secret, and then you can put the key value. So the key that you have to provide is exactly this GitHub-token. Okay, and then once you provide that value, the value you have to provide is the value we got for this GitHub token. This value you have to provide, and then what it will do is it will create that secret for you, which will be used by the pipeline to authenticate. So you'll have this secret name GitHub token, and then value will be from this token. Okay, so what I will do is I will delete this token because I already have a token. Okay, now that we have created the GitHub token and published it in the secrets manager, now what we need to do is we need to go ahead and write the code. So we'll go to the lib folder and then import this code pipeline construct. So I have given a URL. You can go to that and I have just already opened it here. So this is the module we need to import. So you can read a little bit about what it does. So this is the construct we're going to use. So code pipeline. And as we have seen, the first thing is to import this module pipelines. But when I do that, somehow the CDK does not allow me to import this module pipeline. So I'll just show you. Import star as if I do pipelines and AWS CDK. Say pipelines. It only allows me the code pipeline, but not the pipelines. So I'll just show you very specific constructs that you need to import. But before that, let me show you the code. So if I go to the construct pipeline, so there's an example that has been given here. So in order to create this pipeline, we need three attributes. One is synth, input, and commands. So synth is basically a series of shell steps that you need to run. The second one is input, what is our source code repository, and the third is the command. So you run these three commands: npm ca, npm run build, and npm cdk synth. And here are the attributes that have been defined. You can read a little bit more. So what I will do is, rather than importing this pipeline, I'm going to import these three specific constructs, and I've just highlighted here which ones to include based on what I just explained: the code pipeline source, and shell stuff. So let me just copy these. And I'm just going to get rid of this because it doesn't work. I tried it a few times. Okay, now we'll just write the code. So I will say AWS CDK pipeline. Now what I will do is I'll go back to that code snippet and I will just import that or just copy that. So here is a code snippet which explains how you need to do it. So I will just copy this part. So if I go here, so I'll say demo CI/CD pipeline, new, and I will say code pipeline, and then I will say the scope, this, comma, logical ID is demo pipeline, and then I just have to provide the attributes. Okay, I will just paste what I had copied from there. Okay, so let me just modify this. So we don't need this pipeline now because we have imported the shell script directly. The next one, it says the connection created using the AWS console to authenticate GitHub, and they have given a connection ARN for CodeStar. So I'll just remove this. Don't need this. Okay, and we just need to get rid of, we don't need the pipeline. It's not importing the pipeline, so directly importing the code pipeline source. Okay, and we don't need this as well. So I'll just get rid of this. Okay, now the only thing we have to change is this source. So we have to provide our GitHub link. So this is the one we were using. So it is my login name or username and the repo name. So I'll just copy this. And let me just paste it here. Okay, one more thing, I just gave me an error. So what we need to change is, instead of the code pipeline source connection, we need to use the GitHub connection. So we'll just say git. Okay, so that's pretty much it. It's giving me an error here. I think I missed an apostrophe here. Okay. Now everything looks good. I'll just remove this as an extra brackets. Okay, so I think this pretty much looks good. Now we have to make the change to the bin folder, where we have to add this additional environment variables. So what I've done is I've changed the colors where we have to make any changes in this demo link. So you can just look at these and see what are the changes we need to make. Okay, I will go to the bin folder and I'll just get rid of this boilerplate code. And then I'll just paste the environment variables. So my account ID, so this is my AWS account number, and you can get it from here. This is my AWS account number, and then you have to provide the region and whatever region you want to deploy. So this is pretty much it in terms of the changes. Now we should be able to see our code being pushed to our repository and the code pipeline being generated. AWS says that first time you are doing it, you have to deploy the pipeline manually once with these commands. Next time when you push the code, AWS code pipeline would automatically detect the changes from the GitHub repository and then do the build. So let's run these commands. Okay, now I'm going to run this git add all command. So I'll say git add dash all. Okay, the next one we're going to commit these changes. So I'll say git commit -m and then some message. Git commit -m first commit. Okay, next we're going to run git push and then we're going to do CDK deploy. Okay, I'll say git push and it's going to push all our files to our remote repository. Okay, and finally let me do a clear and let's do CDK deploy. In the meantime, you can see all the files have been pushed to our remote repository that we had created. So you can see it's synthesizing. Let me go to the CloudFormation template. Okay, there's nothing here as of now. Just asking me if I want to deploy the changes. I'll say yes. So I'll just pause the video for a little bit. I waited a few minutes and you can see now it's almost complete. Let me just go to the CloudFormation stack. Okay, it's complete. So it took about 1.5 minutes. And okay. So you can see demo AWS stack pipeline. And it's created quite a few resources. You can see about 15 resources being created. So now if I just go to the code pipeline, you can see it's created this code pipeline, demo code pipeline stack. So it's completed, source succeeded. Now it's doing the build. So it's going to take a few minutes more. So I'll just pause the video for till then. Okay, I just waited for a few minutes. Now it's completed the build phase. So it took about a couple of minutes. And now I'm just waiting the update pipeline phase. You can see here. Okay, I waited a few more minutes and you can see now this update pipeline has also succeeded. Demo pipeline is up and running. I go here. You can see it succeeded and we also made the first commit. Okay, now this is complete. So in the next lecture, what we're going to do is we're going to create a Lambda function and then deploy the Lambda function in test and production environment using this CI/CD pipeline. Okay, in this lecture, we're going to create a Lambda function, a simple Lambda function, and then we're going to launch that Lambda function using the CI/CD pipeline that we created earlier. So the first thing we have to do is we have to create a new file and name it as lambda.ts, or we can name it anything we want. So I'll go here and go to this lib folder and create a new file. Let me call it as lambda-stack.ts. Okay, and then let me just modify this. Maybe we can call it as lambda-stack.ts. This is the code I've written for creating a Lambda function. So I will just show you what is there in this code. So it's a pretty straightforward Lambda function that we have done multiple times previously. First of all, we import the Lambda from this particular module, and then we have a runtime, which is Node.js. Then we have a handler function, so index.handler. And then finally, instead of putting the code in the services folder, we're just going to put it inline. Earlier, we had talked about retrieving the code from multiple ways, maybe from your local disk path, S3 or inline. So we just are going to use the code inline, says hello CDK. So this is pretty straightforward, and this is what we're going to deploy using the code pipeline. So what would happen in enterprise setting is that you create one repo with your infra and application code, and then you provide environment variables such as we had seen earlier, the region we looked at, AWS account ID. Then the third one and the critical one that we will not discuss is the stage variable. So you could provide the stage variable, whether it's dev, test, and prod. You could add another layer where you have the testing stage, and if it's successful, then there's some manual approval, and then finally it is deployed to the prod stage. So for that, we have to create a new file which would hold our stage variable. So what we'll do is we'll create a new file like what we did for our Lambda function here, and we'll call it demo AWS pipeline dash app.stage.ts. So we'll just name it as new file, say demo AWS pipeline dash app dash stack.ts. Okay, now we have created this file. You can see within the lib directory we have three files. The first one we created as demo AWS pipeline dash stack.ts, where we have the CI/CD pipeline. Then we created lambda dash stack.ts, where we have the lambda code. Now we have created demo AWS pipeline dash app dash stack.ts, which will hold the stage variable. So I've already written some code for this. I'll just paste and explain to you what it means. Okay, I've just pasted this code, so I'll just explain to you what it means. The first line is pretty standard. So you are importing the core module, then we are importing the constructs, which we do every time. Then the third import we are doing is from this particular lambda stack. So if you see here, so this is our lambda stack here, and that's what we're importing, and this is our path. This is the path for this particular file. Then we're going to extend this pipeline app stage to CDK stage, and then we have the stage props. So if I go to this file, so instead of this CDK and stack props, we're going to use the stage props here, and then we're also going to use a stage here. And then we are going to create demo lambda stack, which would be lambda stack from here. And then it would have just two properties, will be this, the scope, and then the logical ID. Okay, I have made some changes to this demo AWS pipeline dash stack.ts, which we use to create the code pipeline. So I'll just show you. The first change that I have made is I have added this pipeline dash app stage from this particular file. So this is what I have just added, pipeline app stage. So this is what we're going to import. Then we are also going to import manual approval stuff. So basically what we are trying to do is we are going to make some changes to the code, deploy it in the test environment. If it does the build and everything runs fine, then there is going to be a manual approval stage in the code pipeline itself. Once you approve, it will be deployed to the production environment. So for the manual approval step, we have to import the pipelines from the AWS CDK lib pipelines. So the other thing I have included is this code. So basically what it does is it uses the add stage method. Let me just show you. So if you go to the AWS documentation, you can see there's a method called add stage. And what it says is you can define the pipeline, instantiate as many instances of application stage as you want for your test and production app with different parameters for calling the pipeline add stage. So that's what we are doing here. So we're going to pass the parameters. Here we're going to pass the test, and here we're going to pass the parameter prod. And then in between we have an add post, which is a manual approval step for which we had done this import. Okay, here we have this testing stage, and then we have this variable demo CI/CD pipeline dot add stage, and this is the convention. If you see here in the documentation, that's how it needs to be written. So you can see it here. So you have the pipeline, which is your variable. Then you have the add stage, new my application, this dot stage name. So that is what we have done. So we have the testing stage, and then you have the demo CI/CD, which is our variable here, and add stage, new pipeline app stage. So this comes from here, pipeline app stage. And then you pass a stage variable. So you have test here, prod, and you have the manual step here. Okay, that should be pretty much it. Okay, now that we have made changes to these three files and the one in the bin folder, we're going to commit these changes to our GitHub repo. So let me go here and let's say a message. Now let's put a message and say final commit. And now let's do a commit and push. So it's asked me, would you like Visual Studio to periodically run the Git fetch? So you can say yes. So now if I go to my GitHub repository, you can see the final commit. message that we have delivered is here and it's been committed now. Now, if I go to my code pipeline, it should have automatically detected these changes and started the build. So let's just check. Now you can see it's rebuilding. So if in the source, this is the final commit message that we had given. So it's detected that, and now it's going to do the build. Okay, I waited a few minutes and now we can see it has completed the update pipeline, the build, and also the source. Now it's creating the Lambda function in the test environment. And you can see the CloudFormation is succeeded. So if I just go here, you can see it's creating the test Lambda function. It's in progress. If I just go here, and if I go to resources, so you can see the Lambda function has been created here. So you can see test Lambda stack has been created, and I think it's just to okay. And this was our inline code export.handler is equal to hello CDK. Okay, now let's go back to the pipeline. The next what it's going to do is it's going to wait for manual approval. So we'll have to go to the pipeline, review it, and then say, okay, deploy to production and just approve it. And now you'll see this has been approved and then it will start the deployment to the prod. So you should see it in a little bit. I think it's doing in the prepare phase. If I go to this CloudFormation, let's see what's going on. So now you can see it's deploying to prod lambda stack. I just go here. Now just go to resources. Okay, I think it's still in the progress of creating. So I'll pause the video for a little bit. Okay, so it's through the prepare phase is succeeded. Now it's in the deploy. Okay, you can see it's still in progress. And if I go to CloudFormation, okay, still no lambda function. Oh, okay. Now I can see the lambda function. So if I just click on this, and I should be able to see the lambda function in the prod environment. Okay, you can see inline code that we had provided. So if I run this lambda function, so let me just provide a test event. So let's call it test and do a save. And if I just go and run this now, so you can see there is no response because we are not printing out anything, but it ran the lambda function successfully. You can see here. Okay, if I go to code pipeline now, and now you can see even the deploy has succeeded.